Neptown Tuner here. Today we're going to be looking at fuel pressure, and this is just the simple thing. We're not looking at scan tools, we're not pulling out a multi-$100 fuel pressure test kit and all this kind of stuff. This is testing. This is generalization testing. So long story short, there was an email that I got, and someone thought that they have a fuel pressure issue. They got stranded. The engine started missing out a little bit, and at about 20 mile an hour it shut off completely, and then they had to coast to a stop. That's the long story short from the email. I'm not going to read the email this time. So here's what we're going to do to just basically test fuel pressure. We've got a high side and a low side on this specific vehicle. The specific vehicles, and really you can watch a lot of my videos and get generalizations because a lot of engines are pretty similar. Except this one does have a high pressure fuel system, but most modern vehicles are moving towards a high pressure fuel system. You're still going to have a low pressure fuel system, so that means that there's going to be an electric motor in the fuel tank delivering the fuel up to the engine, and then it's going to go up to this high pressure fuel pump right here, and it's going to increase the pressure even more to fancier fuel injectors that are going to pop off at like 2,000 plus psi or so. So the first thing we can do is, and there's specific values for this, but in generalization form, we're just gonna, like, there's a specific flow rate, but I know that this car is running absolutely perfectly. So I've got myself a 500 milliliter bottle, and you can just kind of see what kind of flow rate you're supposed to get on a normally operating engine from the low pressure fuel side first. So we're going to disconnect this fuel line right here. This is a low pressure fuel line because it's before the high pressure fuel pump. Once it gets to the high pressure fuel pump, it's a lot harder to test because it goes straight to the high pressure rail, the metal rail. So, and we'll get to that after this. We're going to go to this connector right here on this fuel line, push in. This one's really pretty easy. You just push in and then pull out. You see, there wasn't a whole lot that came out right there. It wasn't really too pressurized. And I know I'm going to get all the comments. You should disconnect the fuel pump fuse and then run it until it runs out of fuel and all this kind of stuff. Look, I'm a barbarian. So just let it be known. So, but absolutely, you don't be like me. Do as I don't say, not as I do, or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this water bottle here. I'm going to put it in here, and we're going to collect a fuel sample, kind of like when you go to get a drug test and you're going to take a piss sample. This is kind of like a piss sample for your engine. So I'm going to turn the ignition on, and we're going to see how much fuel goes into this bottle right here. I turned the ignition switch on, and this is how much. So first off, I could probably overflow this bottle. Look at how much fuel came out of there. That's a lot of fuel. When you open the door, it energizes the pump, and then whenever you hit the key, it energizes the pump. So let me this is about 200 and let's say that's about like 220. This is about 220 milliliters maybe. It's almost halfway full. So I'm going to pour this back in the fuel tank. In this specific case, I got, what is this? Quarter of a bottle, so that's like 125 milliliters. I'm going to pour this back in the tank. Now, in my specific vehicle, when I open the door, it energizes the fuel pump, but not every time. You have to give it some time before it resets and does that. So when you open the door, it energizes the fuel pump. Then when you hit the ignition, it energizes the fuel pump. So this time, to start, I'm just going to show you how much fuel goes in this 500 milliliter bottle just with opening the door. It will not energize the pump again whenever I open the door a second time back to back. There's like a 1 minute delay. I don't know exactly how long the delay is. But I'm going to open the door again and we'll take a look to see if it sprays again. Obviously it did spray again. Now I would say, so maybe we're getting like 120 milliliters roughly every cycle of the door. Now I'm going to try one more time with the door. Now I just opened the door again and it didn't cycle. Let's try again. I just opened the door again and it didn't cycle. So now I'm going to pour this back in the tank and we're going to try opening the door and hitting the ignition switch, or maybe just hitting the ignition switch. So I left the door open. I'm going to close it, open it up again, because I've never really tried this. I'm just doing this right now for you guys. And then I'm going to hit the ignition switch. We'll see what happens. That was a door cycle and an ignition switch cycle. Maybe it's closer to 125 milliliters. That's probably every cycle of the keys. Let's just say 120 to 125 milliliters. That's probably the most accurate, because that looks like about halfway to me, if it looks like halfway to you. Alright, so that's the generalization on the low pressure side. That's a volume test. That's not a pressure test. Pressure test is something different, but give me your opinion in the comments. Of course you want to hook up a pressure tester. You could put an inline pressure tester in this. You could find you'd have to have a specialized kit though to get it hooked up to this fitting, or you'd have to chop the hose off and put an inline fitting in or something fancy. Now we're looking at the high fuel pressure side. You're going to go from the low side into the high pressure fuel pump. It's got a metering valve right here. It will run without this plugged in, but you'll hear kind of a whiny noise. You plug it back in, that noise goes away. Of course, I wouldn't suggest running it with that unplugged. I'm just saying it will run without this unplugged. But this metering valve can go bad, and the pump itself can go bad. And this is a very high common failure item. And the thing is, when this does fail, fuel can leak into your oil, and then it can dilute your oil, and that's a very bad thing for your engine, because when you have diluted oil, it'll start wiping out your bearings. So it's not a bad idea to change this prematurely. Change it before it goes bad. Change it every 100,000 miles. It's a common enough issue at this point to where you need to change it for maintenance purposes. Now this high pressure fuel sensor isn't as common, but I would suggest replacing it in pairs every 100,000 miles. Get a Hitachi pump, get a Bosch sensor, and this sensor is easy enough to change. You just take one T30 out right here, move this pipe to the side, unplug these connectors if you need, and then you can get a 27 millimeter right in here or it's like 1 inch and 1/16. So if you don't have that, it has to be a deep well. I've shown how to do that. I got a video on how to replace this, and this can cause a stalling issue. I had it on my own car where it stalled out. It would not restart. I had already either had a new high pressure fuel pump on it, or I changed the high pressure fuel pump first and it still wouldn't start. It would only start after I changed this sensor. Of course, you can see what the high pressure is on a scan tool, but not if this sensor is faulty. So I really don't feel bad about changing parts like that, especially if they've had 100,000 plus miles on them, which most of these engines need them at this point, just for maintenance purposes alone, regardless if it's gone bad or not. I don't care if you call me a parts changer. It's just maintenance type stuff. And so how are we going to see the high pressure fuel if we're not going by the sensor? If the sensor has a false reading, The backyard method is we got to crack the line and just take a look at it. And you could crack this sensor right here, but that would be very difficult to get to, and you'd have to have it unplugged to do that. What we could do, and what I'm going to show, you know, I'm probably going to get some heat from it in the comments, and people are going to call me irresponsible, but if you got to do what you got to do, then you can take a look at what mine looks like, and you can compare it to yours, because mine's a fine running engine. So this right here, this connector right here, the smaller one below here, this is the knock sensor right here. This one right here that has the smaller wires goes to your other stuff, like your throttle position sensor and your control valves back here and stuff. This connector right here with the 8 thicker wires, it goes to your fuel injectors. So if we unplug the fuel injector harness right here, the 8-wire harness, then the engine will not start. And what we can do is then we can crack that line while the engine's cranking over, and you can take a look at how much fuel is spraying out. Of course, I've got a pan underneath the engine, nothing's gonna hit the ground, and I'm in a safe environment with a fire extinguisher at hand. You know, fuel is flammable, so you can't just be playing with fuel, and you could burn your car down whenever you're messing with fuel like this. This is not advisable. This is just for educational purposes only. Do not try this at home, kids. So at your own risk, watch the video and don't try this. Gotta do this fast. Stick this wrench in here and we're gonna loosen it. You shouldn't need to do that irresponsible test, but if you're curious if your pump is working at all, you could crack the line to see if any fuel is coming out of the high pressure pump. That is a test you could do. As you can tell, a lot less fuel comes out of the bottom of the high pressure side than comes out of the low pressure side. Low pressure blows it out really fast and lots of volume whenever it's disconnected. High pressure, not so much. Whenever you're just trying to crank the engine over, it just barely kind of spits it out. Whenever the engine's running, there will be kind of like a mist or a spray, but I don't really need to show you that. Like I say, typically the pump isn't going to be intermittent. If you have an intermittent type issue, it's probably the sensor itself. And if you have other opinions, or if you have more professional ways to do it, then tell me in the comments. If there's some kind of DIY fuel pressure test that fits it. I've never really needed to do the high pressure testing, to tell you the truth, or the low pressure. To tell you the truth, I haven't replaced a fuel pump in a B8 or a B8.5 yet. I haven't replaced the module for the fuel pump in a B8 or a B8.5 yet. I haven't done those. I haven't needed to do those flow rate tests or a pressure test yet. I just replace the high pressure fuel pump and the high pressure fuel pump sensor, and so far I've been in good shape. But I did those tests for YouTube, and we'll see if it's helpful or not. I don't know. But you can typically, that's basic backyard mechanics, is crack the line and see if you got fuel. Sometimes you're airlocked or something and you gotta crack the line to, not really, but anyway, Naptown Tuner, like and subscribe.